April 9, 2026, and the Atlanta rap scene woke up to something it has never experienced before. Not a diss track, not a social media post, not a meme. Something far more dangerous, far more permanent, and far more devastating than anything Curtis Jackson has ever deployed in his two-decade career of calculated destruction. The world was not prepared for what hit the music industry this morning. Nobody was. Not the fans, not the executives, not the lawyers who spent all of last night burning through billable hours trying to prevent exactly what is now playing out in real time across every platform, every group chat, every studio, and every kitchen table from Bankhead to Buckhead. The date matters. April 9, 2026 is not a regular Wednesday. This is the day that 16 years of denial, deflection, and dictionary-toting defenses may have finally been stripped away by 14 seconds of audio. Let that land for a moment. 14 seconds. Not a court ruling, not a sworn affidavit, not a federal indictment. 14 seconds of audio embedded in the promotional trailer for 50 Cent's upcoming Netflix documentary is allegedly doing what prosecutors, rival rappers, podcast hosts, and social media courts have failed to do for nearly 2 decades. Sources close to the G-Unit production team allege that a distorted but unmistakable Southern voice appears in the trailer at the 42-second mark, speaking words that, if authenticated and publicly released in their unedited form, would permanently and irreversibly collapse one of the most carefully constructed personas in the history of Southern hip-hop, the King of the South. The man who built his brand on codes, on loyalty, on the phrase that became his armor, check the paperwork. He told the world to check the paperwork because he knew his name was redacted. What he never accounted for, what nobody in his camp anticipated, was that 50 Cent would not check the paperwork. 50 Cent bought the audio, and according to people familiar with the situation, T.I. is currently in the most significant crisis of his professional life. Not a PR crisis, not a Twitter cycle, a genuine white-faced leave-your-own comedy show mid-performance, draft a $15 million lawsuit in 24 hours crisis. The kind of crisis that does not resolve over a weekend. The kind of crisis where your lawyer calls you at midnight and the first words out of his mouth are not reassuring. The kind of crisis where 16 years of carefully constructed narrative sit on the edge of a hard drive somewhere in a New York edit bay, waiting for a streaming platform's legal compliance team to give the final green light. And according to industry insiders, that green light is already on. Before we go any deeper into what is unfolding right now, make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and hit that bell icon right now. This story is moving fast. Every hour brings new information, and if you are not subscribed, you will miss the moment when this entire situation detonates publicly. The documentary trailer has not yet dropped to the general public as of this morning, but it is coming. When it does, you need to be here. You need the full context before it floods your timeline without background, without truth, and without the connections that make this story so much bigger than a rap beef. Subscribe right now, because what is coming in the next few weeks will require you to have seen everything we are about to break down today. Now let us get back to it. The city of Atlanta has always had a particular relationship with silence. Anyone who knows Southern hip-hop culture understands that what is not said carries as much weight as what is. The code has never been written down because it does not need to be. You either understand it or you do not. And for 16 years, Clifford Harris understood it well enough to talk around it, to perform his way past it, to intellectualize it into a corner where casual listeners would feel confused rather than convinced. But the streets never forgot the math. The math was always there, sitting in plain sight for anyone willing to run the numbers. October 13th, 2007, the night before one of the biggest events in Atlanta's hip-hop calendar, the BET Hip Hop Awards. T.I. is at the peak of his cultural power. King is in the rear view. T.I. versus T.I.P. has just been released. He is untouchable, or so it seems. And then federal agents move in. The arrest is swift, clinical, and devastating. Machine guns, silencers, hand grenades, federal weapons charges that, under mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines, carry a potential sentence of 10 to 20 years. The kind of sentence that does not just interrupt a career, it ends one. It ends a life as that person knew it. The kind of sentence where you sit in that holding cell and you do the math on your children's ages and you realize that when you get out, if you get out, they will be adults who barely remember who you were. Now here is where the story splits. Here is where the official version and the whispered version have lived in parallel for nearly 2 decades. The official version says T.I. cooperated with law enforcement in a limited, publicly acceptable way. He recorded a Crime Stoppers public service announcement. He did community service. He served 366 days and was released. Case closed. Legacy intact. Check the paperwork. Nothing there. That is the official version, and T.I. has defended it with the kind of passionate, multi-syllabic, borderline theatrical intensity that, to his credit, worked for a very long time. But the streets run a different calculation. They always have. Because here is what the paperwork does not fully explain. Federal machine gun charges with aggravating circumstances do not resolve into 1 year. They do not. Not in the American legal system. Not for a black man in Georgia in 2007. Not without something being offered in exchange for that leniency. The math does not work unless a variable is missing, and the street has always believed it knows what that variable is. That belief has simmered for years, surfacing in blogs, in interviews, in boozy badaz, publicly canceling an album and calling for documentation, in 50 Cent's relentless social media trolling, each post more pointed than the last, each one landing a little closer to the center of something T.I. clearly does not want touched. But this was only the beginning of understanding what today actually means. To fully understand why April 9, 2026 is different from every other day this story has been in the conversation, you have to understand what 50 Cent has actually built over the past 3 years. Because this is not just a rap beef anymore. This stopped being a rap beef the moment Curtis Jackson sat down with Netflix executives and turned his obsession with exposing the music industry into a multi-million-dollar streaming deal. When 50 Cent sold his Diddy documentary to Netflix, he did not just sell a television show. He acquired the infrastructure of a news organization. Private investigators, FOIA requests, former federal employees willing to talk on background, evidence lockers from abandoned cases, hard drives that changed hands multiple times before landing in a production facility in New York. He built the legal architecture of a media company, and he pointed that architecture directly at the darkest corners of an industry he has spent decades claiming he alone truly understands. Sources close to the G-Unit production team say the research phase for the Diddy documentary was unlike anything a music industry documentary has ever undertaken. The team allegedly spent upward of $2.5 million acquiring materials, not just interviews, not just archival footage, materials, audio, video, documents, things that were never supposed to leave private hands, things that were once used as leverage, things that sat in places where people assumed they would never surface because the cost of surfacing them was too high for any individual to pay. 50 Cent, now operating as a television executive with a Netflix budget and a legal team that reports to the most powerful streaming platform on earth, did not face those same individual constraints. And allegedly, somewhere in that enormous acquisition of materials was a hard drive labeled, according to one source, ATL Intercepts 07. What was on that hard drive, if sources are to be believed, was not recorded by law enforcement. This is the detail that changes everything. This is the detail that T.I.'s standard defense cannot touch, because his standard defense has always been pointed at police cooperation, at paperwork, at legal definitions of assistance and cooperation. But what sources allege is that the audio clip featured in 50 Cent's trailer was not a wiretap. It was not a federal recording. It was allegedly captured by one of Diddy's famous hidden surveillance systems at a private gathering in Atlanta in late 2007. Weeks after T.I.'s arrest, and if that is true, if the rumor circulating in the Atlanta industry whisper network has any substance, then T.I. is not on a tape talking to federal agents. He is on a tape discussing things at a private gathering that he believed, as most people at those gatherings believed, was confidential among the attendees. He did not know he was being recorded. He had no reason to think he was. And now, allegedly, that recording has traveled from a seized hard drive in a federal evidence facility to a G-Unit edit bay in New York. And the man who controls that edit bay just smiled and told his team to put it in the trailer. By the time the internal teaser for the documentary was screened privately last week, sources familiar with the event claim the room went quiet in a way that edit bays are not supposed to go quiet. These are professionals, people who have spent careers watching raw, unedited footage of things the public will never see, desensitized, technically oriented, emotionally detached by training and by necessity. And allegedly, when the audio played at the 42-second mark of the teaser, the room went dead. One producer allegedly looked at the engineer beside them and did not say a word. The audio engineer who allegedly worked on the stems describes the moment this way, through an anonymous account relayed to an industry blog. We were given a hard drive labeled ATL Intercepts 07. When we pulled the audio into Pro Tools, nobody could believe it. 50 came into the bay, listened to it once, smiled and said, "Put it in the teaser. Let's see who jumps." Within 48 hours of that private screening, the low-resolution version of the clip had leaked. Not to the public, not yet, but to the people it needed to reach, to the people who would immediately recognize the voice, to the people who would immediately begin making phone calls. And one of those calls, according to sources close to the Atlanta camp, reached T.I. while he was at a comedy venue preparing for a stand-up set. The timing was almost cinematic in its cruelty. The man who has spent the last 2 years reinventing himself as a comedian, deliberately stepping away from the rap executive persona, presenting himself as lighter, funnier, unbothered, was standing backstage in a comedy club when the clip reached his group chat. And according to a former member of T.I.'s entourage who claims to have spoken to people present at the venue that night, T.I. did not type a response. He did not argue. He did not post a video. He read whatever was in that message, put the phone in his pocket, walked out of the venue, and did not return. The show was paused. Excuses were made to the audience, and somewhere between that comedy club and his next destination, the calls to Los Angeles began. The moment news spread through the Atlanta music circle was the moment the nature of the situation changed completely. Because here is what you need to understand about the modern era of hip-hop accountability. The rules have shifted. This is not 2007, this is not even 2015. The Young Thug trial, the YSL RICO case, the public release of cooperation agreements and plea deal structures made snitching paperwork front-page entertainment news for an entirely new generation of fans who are now fluent in the legal mechanics of what cooperation actually looks like. The culture no longer extends the benefit of the doubt on the basis of verbal denial. The culture now reads documents. The culture now watches trials. The culture now understands the difference between a man who did a PSA and a man who provided intel, and the culture is increasingly comfortable concluding that the two are not mutually exclusive. T.I.'s verbal defenses, which worked beautifully in a pre-YSL trial cultural context, land differently now. His dictionary references land differently. His legal semantics land differently. And his silence on this specific clip lands louder than anything he has said in the last 5 years. But what happened next would shock everyone who assumed T.I.'s team would simply wait and see. Within 24 hours of the trailer's private circulation, sources allege that T.I.'s legal team in Los Angeles had drafted a preemptive defamation lawsuit targeting G-Unit Film and Television. The figure allegedly cited in the filing is $15 million. The document was allegedly delivered to G-Unit's New York offices at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, the kind of early morning, aggressive, first-move legal action that says we are not going to let this develop. We are going to try to stop this before it becomes public. The legal argument, according to sources familiar with the filing, leans heavily on a single claim: voice manipulation, artificial intelligence. The argument that in 2026, With AI voice synthesis technology as advanced as it is, no audio clip of any artist can be considered authentic without forensic authentication. It is, technically speaking, a coherent legal argument. It is also, strategically speaking, the argument of a team that knows it cannot win on the merits of denial. Because here is the problem with the AI voice defense in this particular situation. The clip is not in a meme, it is not on Instagram, it is allegedly in a Netflix documentary trailer. And Netflix does not clear audio for documentary trailers the way someone clears a GIF for social media. Netflix has one of the most rigorous content compliance and legal clearance processes in the entertainment industry. Every single piece of audio, video, document, and testimony that appears in a Netflix documentary goes through what the industry calls a chain of title review. You must prove that what you are claiming is what it actually is. You must have documentation. You must have authentication. If the audio is in the trailer, Netflix's legal team has already determined, with their own forensic consultants, that it is real. TI. Sending a cease and desist to G-Unit is, as one entertainment lawyer close to the situation described it, like bringing a water gun to a drone strike. And then 50 Cent allegedly responded to the legal threat, not with a counterfiling, not with a press release, not with a lawyer's letter, with a text message. Sources close to both camps allege that 50 Cent sent T.I.'s personal phone number, a 10-second audio clip, not the distorted version from the trailer. The original, crystal clear, full quality, and beneath the audio clip a single caption. 2 words, get the strap. Let that sit for a moment because that text message, if it is real, is one of the most calculated moves in this entire situation. It is not aggression, it is demonstration. It is 50 Cent showing T.I. the full scope of what he is holding, not to escalate, not to threaten in any legally actionable way, simply to communicate, I have the original, I have more than what is in the trailer, and your $15 million lawsuit is not going to make me forget that I have it. The room fell silent in Atlanta. In a way, it has not fallen silent in a very long time. Now here is where the story becomes something more complex than a beef, more significant than a documentary, because sources close to the G-Unit research team allege that the tape T.I. is panicking about is not primarily a snitching tape. It is not, they claim, a recording of T.I. speaking to federal agents. The shift in the prevailing theory over the last 72 hours, as more details have leaked to industry insiders, is this: the tape allegedly captured T.I. at one of Diddy's infamous private gatherings in Atlanta in late November 2007, weeks after his federal arrest. And on that tape, according to the theories circulating in the industry whisper network, T.I. is not speaking to law enforcement. He is speaking to people at the party. He is saying things that, in the context of a man who has just been arrested on federal weapons charges and is negotiating his future with prosecutors, would reveal exactly what was being discussed, exactly what was being offered, and exactly which names were part of that conversation. This is the theory that changes everything. This is the shift from the snitching narrative to the Diddy narrative. T.I. is not allegedly on a tape that the police made. He is allegedly on a tape that Diddy made. And that distinction matters enormously because it means T.I.'s standard legal defense, which has always been oriented around challenging federal documentation, is almost entirely irrelevant to the actual content of what 50 Cent allegedly holds. You cannot challenge the chain of title on a private recording by arguing it does not appear in court documents. You cannot redact a voice. You cannot file a motion to suppress audio from a party you voluntarily attended. And if 50 Cent acquired this recording as part of his broader investigation into Diddy's extensive surveillance operation, which federal investigators have already confirmed existed, then the tape is potentially one of dozens, one of hundreds, one fragment of an enormous archive of private conversations that Diddy's cameras captured and that are now, allegedly, in the hands of people who have every financial and professional incentive to use them. The Epstein parallel is not accidental. Multiple industry observers and legal commentators have drawn the comparison publicly over the past year. Diddy allegedly maintained a system of recorded material that functioned as leverage. The difference between Epstein and Diddy, if the emerging theory is correct, is that 50 Cent is functioning as a kind of self-appointed archivist of consequences, using the documentary format not as journalism in the traditional sense, but as a staged, sequenced, commercially motivated release mechanism. He is not releasing everything at once. He is not dumping files. He is building a television show. He is packaging the truth, or what sources allege is the truth, inside the most powerful distribution machine on Earth. And T.I. may be the first major name to fall, not because 50 Cent particularly targeted him, but because T.I. happened to be at a party that was filmed, and that party happened to involve a conversation that 50 Cent's team found in the archive, and now 50 Cent is building an episode around it. Collateral damage. That is the phrase one industry observer used. T.I. is collateral damage in 50 Cent's war on Diddy. T.I.'s response pattern to this specific type of crisis is, by this point, well documented. When the sexual assault allegations surfaced in 2020 and 21 involving himself and his wife, Tiny, he responded with layered, verbose, multi-platform defenses that used legal semantics to create confusion in the public mind. When Boozy Badazz canceled their album and called publicly for documentation in 2023, T.I. responded with a lengthy video that quoted legal definitions of cooperation and challenged the audience to understand the difference between various types of federal assistance. Both times, the strategy worked moderately well in the short term. Both times, the news cycle moved on before a definitive conclusion could be reached. Both times, T.I.'s verbal dexterity bought him time. But time is the one resource he does not appear to have in this situation, because the documentary trailer is not a rumor, it is a scheduled event. It has a release date. It has a platform. It has a legal team that has already cleared its contents. And every day that passes between now and that public release is a day in which the audio clip, in various forms and with various degrees of distortion, continues to circulate in private channels, reaching more people, being analyzed by more voices, building a consensus among those who have heard it, that the voice is who sources claim it is. T.I.'s traditional strategy of out-talking the conversation requires a conversation that stays verbal. What he is facing now is audio. And the man who once said the words, "check the paperwork," as if they were a magic incantation protecting him from consequences, may be discovering that in 2026, the paperwork is the least dangerous thing about this situation. He knew that the conversation existed. He had always known. Whether or not he knew it was recorded is a different question. But the conversation happened. The 2007 arrest happened. The impossible math of the sentencing happened. The Crime Stoppers video happened. And somewhere in Atlanta in late November 2007, a gathering happened, and the cameras were running, and someone said something, and the tape did not get destroyed the way everyone in that room presumably hoped or assumed it would, and now it sits in a Pro Tools session in New York, labeled and logged and cleared by the most powerful legal team in the streaming world, waiting for the moment that 50 Cent decides the viewing public is ready. Nobody moved to stop it. Nobody could. The $15 million lawsuit will not stop it. The AI voice defense will not stop it. The silence, which T.I.'s team seems to have decided is their best current strategy, will not stop it. Because 50 Cent has spent 2.5 years and an enormous amount of money making sure that nothing could stop it. He has structured this as a Netflix production specifically because Netflix's legal infrastructure is impenetrable from the outside. T.I. can sue G-Unit Film and Television. He cannot sue Netflix's compliance process. He cannot undo the chain of title review. He cannot reach back into 2007 and leave that party before the camera caught him. And the Atlanta rap community knows this. The silence from T.I.'s peers is deafening in a way that speaks volumes about what the people who know him actually believe about what is on that tape. Normally, in a situation like this, the industry rallies. Artists post support, friends speak up, the community circles its wagons. That is not happening here. What is happening here is that people who have known Clifford Harris for 20 years are watching their phones very carefully, and they are not posting anything because they do not yet know the full contents of what 50 Cent is holding, and they are not willing to stake their own credibility on a defense of a man whose situation they cannot fully assess. The Atlanta Industry Whisper Network, which has been correct about several major developments over the past 3 years, alleges that T.I. has been making calls, trying to reach mutual acquaintances who might have access to 50 Cent's ear, trying to understand the full scope of the materials on that hard drive, trying to determine whether the 14 seconds in the trailer are the totality of what is being held, or whether they are, as 50 Cent's text message allegedly implied, only a fraction. According to sources with knowledge of those conversations, T.I. has not yet received a satisfying answer. And every hour that passes without that answer is an hour in which the documentary's release moves closer and the room for maneuver grows smaller. You could hear the tension in the silences between the industry conversations happening right now. The silence became suffocating in certain Atlanta circles where people were choosing sides not loudly, but by simply not speaking at all. For the first time in a very long career, T.I. appears to be in a position where his words, the thing he has always relied on, are not only insufficient, but potentially counterproductive. Because anything he says publicly now is either a denial that can be measured against the audio when it releases, or an acknowledgement that confirms there is something to be concerned about. The trap is perfect. Speak and you validate the story. Stay silent and the story builds its own momentum. It is the kind trap that only someone who has studied T.I.'s communication patterns for years would know how to set. And 50 Cent has been studying those patterns for a very long time. Think about the architecture of this moment. 50 Cent did not post the tape. He put 14 seconds of it in a trailer. He did not release the lawsuit publicly. He let it leak from sources. He did not address T.I. by name in any public statement about the documentary. He let T.I.'s own silence and his own camp's panicked movements do the communicating for him. This is not trolling. This is not a meme. This is something far more disciplined, far more deliberate, and far more dangerous than anything 50 Cent has deployed in this beef before. He has learned, through 2 decades of very public conflicts, that the most devastating move is almost always the thing you do not say. Get the strap. 2 words, no further explanation required. Now consider the broader implications of what happens if this audio is released and authenticated publicly. It does not simply damage T.I.'s personal reputation, though it would do that comprehensively and permanently. It sends a message to every artist in the Southern hip-hop ecosystem who has a complicated relationship with their own legal history. It demonstrates that the era of sealed deals and redacted documents is ending, not because the legal system has changed, but because the entertainment industry has developed its own, far more efficient mechanism for surfacing what was buried. Netflix, with $1 billion documentary budget and the legal infrastructure to match, has become something that no single artist crisis management team can adequately oppose. The paradigm has shifted so completely that T.I.'s playbook, developed over nearly 2 decades of successfully navigating controversy, is essentially obsolete. The man who once stood at the center of Atlanta's musical empire, who coined the phrase "King of the South" and spent 20 years defending its validity, now sits in a position where the most powerful tool at his disposal appears to be a $15 million lawsuit aimed at a production company whose parent organization earns $15 million in revenue before most people eat breakfast. He watched the city that crowned him begin to look at him differently. He watched the peers who once stood beside him move carefully to the margins. He watched the comedy bookings that were supposed to represent a new chapter of his career begin to feel like the last chapter of something else entirely. He knew, he felt, he realized. The metadata on the audio file, according to sources who claim to have seen the technical documentation, allegedly timestamps the recording to November 12, 2007, 29 days after his federal arrest, 31 days before his plea agreement would be finalized. The proximity is not subtle, the timing is not coincidental, and 50 Cent's team, allegedly, has the documentation to support that timestamp. What happens next is the question that the Atlanta music community is asking right now, today, on the morning of April 9, 2026. The documentary trailer is coming to the general public. The release is reportedly weeks away, not months. When it drops to the general audience, the 14-second clip will be analyzable, shareable, and subject to the kind of voice pattern analysis that technology makes trivially available to anyone with a smartphone and curiosity. The AI voice defense will be tested in the court of public opinion before it is tested in any actual court. And in the court of public opinion, with the YSL trial as recent precedent and a culture that has never been more attuned to cooperation narratives, the bar for conviction runs significantly lower than reasonable doubt. TI's empire was built on image. The king persona, the grand hustle brand, the family man redemption arc, the intellectual who could outthink any opponent. Each layer of that image has sustained damage over the past decade through the sexual assault allegations, through the Boosie situation, through years of 50 Cent's relentless social media pressure, but those were manageable damages. Survivable. Because they were abstract enough, unverified enough, deniable enough to leave room for TI's most powerful weapon, his tongue, to navigate through. This is different. This is audio. Audio that is allegedly already authenticated. Audio that is allegedly already cleared by a legal team that answers to a streaming platform with a fiduciary responsibility to its shareholders. Audio that 50 Cent allegedly has in full original quality sitting on a hard drive and has already demonstrated a willingness to send directly to TI's personal phone. The walls were closing in. For the first time in his public life, Clifford Harris is in a room with no obvious exit, and the man who locked the door is someone who has spent 20 years being described as a troll, as a provocateur, as someone who is not to be taken seriously. That miscalculation, the decision over the years to treat 50 Cent's attention as a nuisance rather than a threat, may be the most consequential strategic error TI has ever made, because while TI says was doing dictionary videos and philosophy podcasts, 50 Cent was building a documentary empire. While TI was pivoting to comedy, 50 Cent was hiring private investigators. While TI Time was checking the paperwork, 50 Cent was buying the tapes. Outside on social media, the reaction was already beginning, even though the trailer had not yet dropped to the general public. The hip-hop community's remarkable ability to sense when something real is happening, when a story has the particular weight of truth beneath it rather than the lighter feeling of rumor, was already activating. Posts without specifics, vague references to Atlanta and timing, the kind of social media behavior that precedes a major revelation, the anticipatory murmur, the collective leaning forward. People who did not yet know the specific details knew that something was different this time. Something in the quality of the silence from TI's camp was communicating what the camp itself could not. By sunrise on April 9, 2026, the landscape had already shifted. Not irrevocably, not yet, not until the trailer drops publicly and the audio is out in the world in a form that cannot be contained or managed or litigated into silence. But the shift was underway. The foundation had moved. And in hip-hop, as in all things, once the foundation moves, the structure above it is never quite as stable as it appeared before. The empire had not yet fallen, but from where TI stood this morning, the walls of that empire were close, too close, and the man holding the detonator was sitting somewhere in New York, letting the math do its work, letting the silence do its work, letting the trailer do its work, and waiting with the patience that only someone who knows they have already won can afford to show. From the moment that hard drive labeled HCL Intercepts 07 landed in a Pro Tools session, the king of the South's reign over his own narrative began to end. Not with a diss track, not with the court ruling, with 14 seconds of audio and a man who had the infrastructure, the budget, and the patience to wait for exactly the right moment to press play. This was not just a documentary trailer. This was the reckoning that 16 years of mathematics denial and dictionary definitions had been building toward. And as of today, April 9, 2026, nobody knows exactly how it ends. But everyone in Atlanta who knows anything is watching very, very carefully. And this time, they are not watching T.I.'s mouth. They are watching his next move. Because the tape is out there, the platform has it, the lawyers have cleared it, and the silence on T.I.'s end, the most uncharacteristic silence of his entire public life, may be the loudest thing Clifford Harris has ever said. From that moment on, nothing would ever be the same for the King of the South.